Dr. Lars-Erik Liljelund is Director General of the Prime Minister's Office in Sweden with responsibility for climate issues. He's also a member of China Council in Sweden, so I guess China is somehow in mind too. How do you see needs and solutions for systemic changes? That is the topic. Please, Lars-Erik.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this. I've made an interpretation of the title, so I will start to a little bit of giving the background for the needs of systemic changes, and then give some examples from Sweden. But you mentioned China here, and I just reminds me about one example. China is going to build a new industrial center, a new Shanghai, on the coast, about 200 kilometers from Beijing. And a Swedish company, Sweco, is involved in a detailed planning. And then they found, because they have extremely problems with water in this part of China, and they have a very engineering approach to everything. So they would like to build huge pipelines from the south of China and pump water up to the north of China. The groundwater level has decreased in Beijing area for the last 20 years with more than 50 meters. So when Sweco told me that when they were making this detailed plan, they found that they have standards in China which, for example, don't allow low flushing toilets. So they say that to save water, we have this system in Europe with low flushing toilets, but the Chinese say, yeah, but we cannot use that because it's against our standards. So it also shows that, I will come back to that, it's not only about pricing and such things, it's very much, when talking about houses, about standards, I think. So now, something has been going on, and in fact, the impact of what is going on is very much from the 19th century, and especially after the Second World War, where you can see you have an increase in everything you're looking at, from the population, from paper consumption, water use, to the number of McDonald's restaurants. So, and that shows that, and it was also discussed in the panel here about sustainability, that you start to think, what is sustainability and what is sustainable development? And a very simple way or approach to sustainability is to see if can we act like this for decades as we are doing now. And if the answer is no, then it's of course that we have to change. So sustainability is more a platform or a base, first sustainable development to define what type of society we would like to see. And then of course to have a much more longer time perspective and see if we can continue in the same way as we are doing now. And I think all these graphs show that we can't, and then we have to change in some way. It also, this way of acting as the human society is doing, is also very much, it has been mentioned, I think, both by Jeff and the panel, that we have a variable we call the human ecological footprint. And for every year, we can see that we overshoot what the Earth can produce for our way of living. And 2008, it was the 23rd of September, which means that from the 24th of September to the last December, we were overconsuming the production of the Earth. And then, of course, we have some things which we cannot. We also have to look in more detail. Is that some areas of the world, you can see the map here, where the different countries or continents they are reflects the overconsumption or the underconsumption, where you can see very tiny Africa and very tiny South America, and then you can see North America, and you can see Europe, but you also can see China, who is really have an overconsumption. And this is, of course, not sustainable. We have to change this. There is a need for a change, and very fast change. This day is very much about buildings and about energy and the connection by energy use and climate change. So just to show the situation, the world situation, from 65 up to 2006. And I think if you look at the timeline here, it's very interesting because the UN panel for climate change was established in 1988. And the convention, the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change, was signed in Rio 92. The Kyoto Protocol, or the Framework Protocol, was established in Kyoto 97. It was finalized in Marrakesh 2001. But you can see constantly, when the world community has defined this is a problem, we need a convention, and we need a protocol to combat climate change, we have an increase in the use of fossil fuels, especially coal and oil and gas. And if we look at different continents here, you can see you have a constant increase in US, you have a very fast increase in China since 2000. EU is probably will meet the targets to decrease with 8% to 2008 to 2012, as Jeff was showing. But we managed to do that since we have become EU 27, because it's the new member state who helps us to meet the target of minus 8%. And I think it's interesting because you can see here China, it's of course what happens in China since, in fact, 98, 99, when they had their Asian economic crisis. And then it goes very fast. And then, of course, you can start to think, what will be the impact of the financial crisis? For sure, for the first time this year, it will be a decrease in the emissions of greenhouse gases due to the financial crisis. But there have been different estimates on how much it really means. And that is, of course, very much dependent on how long time we are going to have this recession. But it's absolutely a window of opportunity in solving the climate problem. And we have to use these windows of opportunity. But it's, even if we go on the most pessimistic calculations, it means a few gigatons at the end of 2020 in lesser emissions than if we had a business as usual as we have here. So just to say that there is a combination. There is possibilities to both work with the climate and the financial issues, but it has to be done in a very clever way. But it's also, even if we have an economic recession which continues for some years and means lower emissions of greenhouse gases, we still are in an extremely problematic situation when we talk about the climate. And sometimes we say that, why it's not happened what we would like to see. I show the curves and earlier and where we have the convention and different protocols and so on, and still it happens too little. And what I'm afraid of is that we are waiting until we really see the big problem. We can already see the signs of climate change, but we have to act now to defend our future, for sure. And if we look at the analysis from the International Energy Agency, in their last assessment, they say that the world primary energy demand in the reference scenario, this is unsustainable. And they are very pessimistic, in fact, where you can see that the oil, gas and coal is the increasing part. We are talking a lot of wind power, for example, and when we talk about renewable. And the very positive sign is that that is a part who increasing most, but from extremely low level. So something have to be done. Is it impossible? Yes, we can, was mentioned in the panel, and we can, in fact. I assume that you are familiar with these McKinsey cost abatement curves. And I think especially for those who is looking for the future and what we can do, it's very interesting to see. First, to explain it, what you see on the left side, the bars who goes down, it's the easiest thing, is the low-hanging fruits. But you can also earn money. And in fact, if we are going to follow the IPCC recommendation in reduction of greenhouse gases, more than 70% can be done on this left side part, and at the same time you can earn money. And then if we go to the right, you see more and more expensive way of solutions. And just as an example, because we need to act now, the world community is very much focused on what you can see here on CCS. Where is the red dot? You see, CCS, which means carbon capture and storage. A technique may be promising, we don't know the price, we don't have operational plants we have in Norway, but that is something very special where they take out carbon from natural gas, but after burning to take care of this. It's expensive, it's not operational, but if you go out in this climate change community, everyone is talking about CCS. But on the other side, talking about insulation, fuel-efficient commercial vehicles, air conditioning, lighting system, and so on. It's not talking about, and that can be done immediately, without new technique, without new innovations, which take a long time. So yes, we can, if we want, both reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, but also we can earn money from such an approach. And I think it's also important to say, when we're talking about abatement of carbon, is that we need a holistic approach to find the solution, because there is a tendency trying to find solutions which can give impact, negative impact, environmental impact in other areas. We have a huge discussion in Sweden, for example, about ethanol. I don't know if you have that in Finland. But is it sustainable to start to drive cars on ethanol, where we use land to produce this ethanol, which can instead be used to produce food? And if you remember the curves earlier about the increase of population and the ecological footprint map, you can see that you have to be careful, and you need to have a holistic approach to this. Just to give you some examples of the energy use in Sweden from 1990 and 2006, and then come back to some explanations. The total energy use is according to this curve. But if we look then on emissions of CO2 from buildings and services, you can see that it's been constantly decreasing. And the reason behind this, the main reason behind this, the introduction of in fact, pricing mechanisms, where I think Finland was the first country in the world who introduced carbon tax, as far as I know, and Sweden was the second one. And that has given but it's not only that, it's also the oil crisis mentioned earlier here, where we started to introduce rather huge programs to develop energy efficiency in houses, to develop cultivation of what we call energy forests. And everything was taken during the 70s. And that has given an impact. So we have shifted out, for example, in our district heating system, we have shifted out from coal or oil to biofuels of different type or waste. Stockholm is, in fact, we are running the heating system in Stockholm mostly on waste, which of course need, again, a holistic approach and an upstream thinking, so you can, in a safe way, use waste in your plants for producing heat. So in total, we have this decoupling between the emissions of greenhouse gases and GDP since 1990. And 80% of the explanation is in fact economic instruments, but also standards of different types. I like to say that, I mean, everything is about an interaction between policy and policy development and response on these policies from private actors, those who own houses and building the houses and so on. So I think the first thing is, of course, regulations and standards. We have some within the European system, but I think it can be developed. And it can be developed in a way so it really promotes decrease in emission of greenhouse gases. Then pricing mechanisms. There I would like to say taxes is safer than trading schemes. Cap and trade, which was introduced in EU some years ago, which means that you are buying and selling emissions allowances of greenhouse gases. If it's covered the whole world, it's a perfect system. But we can see now, for example, when we have an economic recession, the system not collapse, but the prices on allowances is decreasing very fast. But the tax is constant. And it's strange that we accept taxes on tobacco, alcohol, and I think that a tax on carbon is in the same division. Energy tax also, it's of course very important. The third thing is investment programs. We have been running local investment programs, perhaps some of you know it, for about 10 years. It started first as a more general program where the state could put up to 30% of the investment costs, sometimes up to 50%, but then it was for all type of environmental considerations, water, energy, and such things. The last period, it was only connected to the climate. And it has been extremely cheap to reduce the emissions of carbon tax with these investment programs, if you look on the economy from the whole society point of view. And then, of course, we have public planning, which is a task for this forum and for you, district heating, public transport, but also behavior. I think that sometimes we forget, but it's also very difficult to establish such in a more programmatic form, is norms. A norm. I mean, it's very seldom today you see a woman in the street, I think in Helsinki, with a coat from a leopard or tiger or something like that. In Sweden, in all post offices up to 1940, say don't spit on the floor. But you don't need this signs any longer. So it means that you establish a norm that in your behavior. Today, people spent a lot of time in separating waste in different fractions and put it in different ways so it can be used and recycled. And I think that when we look on in house, when you're living in a flat, especially, I think it's interesting there, to give the possibilities to see what is my energy consumption, not that you have a measurement of the energy use for the whole house and then just put it out in the area of each flat. To change, to give the possibilities to more individual behavior. And I think that could be really, especially now when this climate issue is so highlighted, could give an individual response to this, where you don't have pricing in the first hand, you don't have regulation, you just give the possibilities to individuals to respond on this. So this is the instruments. Time is running. I'm not going to say anything about Copenhagen, but hopefully we will have a next agreement very soon in combat climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars-Erik. Again, we have time for questions. They're behind.
Thank you. Heikki Hirvonen from Pöyry Environment. I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that you see taxation as an efficient way of dealing with this energy and carbon dioxide consumption. How are you going to, in Swedish government, use the taxes? Is it going to also benefit the improvement of industrial or residential situation, or is it going to the government for use in anything? Is it going to be sort of placed on energy efficiency or not?
I see your question, and that is really a hot issue. According to, in fact, our constitution, all taxes go into the same bunch of money, and it's under a budget process. You know, when we introduced carbon tax for the first time, it was when we totally changed our taxation system, which means that carbon tax was in fact an important part of the total budget. And we sometimes, also I would like to see that if you can have an earmarked flow from these taxes to, for example, investments, green investments and so on. But that is not an issue in Sweden and some other countries. It's very, very much against earmarking of taxes. So then we have instead to introduce, which we have in the case of emissions of NOx, a fee instead, where you have a fee you pay, and that can go back to the collective who pay the fee. So, but yeah, it's very much discussed, especially these days when we are talking about financial mechanisms within the new protocol, Copenhagen Protocol, that earmarking is not allowed. Tells the guys at the Ministry of Finance.
Okay. Karin.
Thank you, Lars-Erik. It was an interesting presentation. I wish you would talk to our government. But you said that you're not going to say anything about Copenhagen, but maybe you could tell something about Copenhagen, because Sweden, of course, has a critical role as the presidency of the European Union in December.
Very briefly then, our critical role is to keep the family of 27 countries together. Sometimes when I hear from people in Sweden is that now during the presidency we are going to fight for the Swedish position, but we are not. I must say there are 3 real problems, and that is not the financial crisis, is not among those problems. Still, all leaders is saying that. Also, that is will be a message from G70 meeting in London later this week. But it's when are US prepared to come to and sign an agreement? Because they have been very, very clear that they need to have their domestic plan in place. The second thing is a very critical point called comparable efforts. And EU has this minus 30%, and comparable efforts from US means about 20 to 25% decrease. And they say we cannot deliver more than 15%. And the third thing is to come to a joint agreement about financial mechanisms. And that is 3 main issues that have to be solved in the coming 6 months.
Go ahead.
My name is Arttu Nuorkivi, and I would be interested to know how Sweden will support or subsidize investments in combating climate change.
You mean in, domestic investments?
Yes.
As I said, we have running this program called CLIMP for 4 to 5 years. Just now, the program is not running. It ended 2 years ago. But it's of course a rather sensitive issue to have public investments going to different sector. Most of them are public. It's a municipality sector to change from coal to biofuels in district heating and so on. And as perhaps you know, we need a notification from EU that it's not as is according to the rules and the free market and such things. But what I think is interesting, our experience is that this type of investments, where you have perhaps 20 to 40% from the state, gives an extremely cheap, for example, reduction in CO2. So our experiences is very good.
How would you evaluate Swedish energy advisory system or services that is municipal service for homeowners and home builders?
Our experience there also is very, very good, because this type of the state is too far away from the single man or woman. Yeah. But these advisors, our experiences with these advisors has been very, very good. And what they are doing every year, just as an example, now is a time when people eventually get money back. They have paid too much in taxes for the last year, and they get the money back. Then they go out immediately and say, if you would like to invest this money in a good way, because especially these days it's not good to buy funds and so such things, invest in energy efficiency.
So, thank you, Lars-Erik Liljelund. Now we are heading more closer to city level, and we move to Freiburg